Hello, and welcome to Standby for Adventure. This is John. One of these days I'll get some sort of intro thing worked up, or maybe spend some money on getting a intro theme or something, but this works for now. And today we're going to talk about sort of advanced tips for game masters, and these honestly are going to especially be useful for newer players or newer game masters who have kind of dipped their feet into the pool a little bit, learned how to run their game, has gotten a little bit comfortable, and wants to do more, be a better storyteller, a better game master. And obviously, a lot of the things that you'll have to get comfortable with when running a game really are going to be the rules. So that's even the first thing I would say is make sure you're double checking rules and reading your rules and things like that. So I'm not even going to cover that. That's the only time I'm going to mention that. I've got a few different topics to go over here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different topics. And let's just jump in. First off, if you're a new GM and you're looking to up your game, one of the things that you can do, and this can people have different approaches to how they game master and how they run their games. In some cases, and I've played with people like this, the GM feels they have an adversarial relationship with the player characters. The GM is not going to be unfair necessarily, but your GM may feel like, or you may feel like, I'm not ever going to fudge any dice rolls. Just wherever they lie, that's what happens, and the rules will indicate what goes on. I'm going to run the game so that you have to be smart enough to know to run away, because I might throw a couple of ogres at you as a random encounter, and you should know as lowish level players or lowest level characters, and also even if you're a new player, that would seem like a really significant threat. Um, and that sort of GM very much leaves the power of life and death in the hands of the players for them to make good decisions or not, and in the hands of the dice, which are random, hopefully completely random. Um, that's not necessarily the best way to go about being a game master, but it's not a bad way. It's just something you absolutely want to be upfront with your players about. Um, and it may even be unfair to call that an adversarial relationship. It's just I'm running the game as it's written. You better make good choices, just like you better make good choices in life in order to get ahead and do whatever it is you're trying to do, right? So it is not necessarily heroic. It's much more, I hesitate to say realistic. It's a much more gritty sort of experience to play in a game like that, like a George R. R. Martin Game of Thrones sort of setting. Is very much death is a real part of the story, and that is a way to run a game. It may not be, and in fact, I would say it is not the best way to run a game for new players, because they want to feel like they just get to come and play the game, and they're just getting into it. So to kill off a character for a new player might really turn them off for a long time. I tend to not kill players off unless they really do something stupid or foolish. Players, characters. Um, but I don't really pull punches with regards to if they go down, that happens, and thankfully I've been playing with the same people for long enough that they are all very good about healing each other and getting everybody back up and running, because they don't like it when their characters die because they've had it happen to them in the past. So when you sit down for your first session, absolutely for the very first session, the session 0, make it clear to your players, hey, I'm going to run this very straightforward, quote unquote, adversarial style. Or the other choice is to go a little bit nicer and have the game be not easy, and not that you're going to be going easy on them, but that every now and again you might fudge a die roll in order to make sure the story continues and isn't interrupted in a really unfortunate bad way that nobody's going to end up enjoying. Or you think a particular scene would be more interesting if it went this way versus that way, and so you decide to have a character react in such a way to maybe guide the characters towards something that they were potentially heading off towards a red herring, and have it be so that you and the players are really sculpting the story together in order to make sure it goes where everybody wants it to. That's kind of how I end up running games. I want my players to have fun. I want to have fun. Killing the characters is not fun to me, but there is always danger. One of the things I wanted to do as a sidebar real quick about this image that's showing right now, this Welcome to My Neighborhood Roll for Initiative, you may have seen this meme around for a long time. And what's funny is this is actually my table and GM screen from a D&D game, a 5th edition D&D game I was running 7-8 years ago, that my friend Seth Johnson took a picture of and then put this meme together. And it's really weird to see it come round and round the internet whenever it appears. So I just searched this out today and it came right up. And but just kind of fun. I'm going to get my cat quick, so excuse me for 1 second. He was stuck outside. Sorry about that. And as I was saying, the other way to go about being a GM is to just help tell the story with them, right? I don't know if there's another way really to game master than those two. I mean, you could go full adversarial, but that just ends the game immediately. And you could go full, oh, this is a good term, Monty Hall. Nobody except somebody of my age or older is going to know that reference. But that was he was a host of an old game show, and he would give out tons and tons of prizes. And so they very much referred to things back in the 80s as being a Monty Hall dungeon, that there was just like magic swords and money and all sorts of crazy stuff, and that's also a way you could run the game, which is fun for a certain amount of time. But just be very upfront from the beginning of how you're going to run your game, and it just, again, helps to set that expectation with everybody. They know what they need to be thinking like and what they need to be trying to do during a game, and you know what you're trying to do during a game. I highly, highly recommend having that, including that as part of your conversation when you start a game. Don't be passive aggressive, and this can be a tough one, because especially for younger players, and I don't say that to be insulting. There's a lot of weird social situations that you will get into over the course of your life, obviously. And one of the things you have to grow to be comfortable with is being very upfront and honest without being a dick, pardon my language. And you really want to avoid being passive aggressive. And I know I did this for a long time when I was younger. If somebody was doing something and I knew they were cheating, or I knew they were doing one thing or another, or somehow adding things to their character sheet and thought I wouldn't see it, and I would just make it so that, I wouldn't mark down damage, and so they would never get to kill a creature. And I quickly learned that was really stupid. I just needed to tell the person, like, this is not cool. It's just a game. We're all trying to have fun. Explain again, like, I'm not trying to kill your characters. As we're playing the game, I want us all to tell a good story. And sometimes I can understand a little bit of cheating when players get really frustrated with terrible rolls, and I've had nights where it's just like fail, 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 and it sucks. And you just want to feel like, this is my entertainment. I want to have fun. I want to do something. And so I can understand that impulse to cheat in that case. And if you have a player that's doing that, maybe mention it to them, but also maybe just let it go because they're trying to have a good time too. But if it's a problem, a consistent, really problematic issue that other people mention to you, just be upfront and say, listen, you got to stop doing it, and don't take it out on them in game in a way that they don't know what is going on. They're not being punished; they're just being treated badly because they don't know why they're being treated badly. So it's just rude, really. So something to keep in mind, and as you're running games, is just be upfront with people, and if they're not adult enough to be able to handle that conversation, one, it'll be the first of a number of conversations like that that they have over the course of their life until they learn how to deal with it better. And two, they're maybe not going to be a good addition to your game table, and you may have to ask them to leave if they don't change things. And that, too, is important to do when it is that time. If you find out something disturbing about a player, if somebody does something inappropriate to or with another member of your gaming group that you or however many other people at the table do not agree with, or the person that they did, be upfront, be straightforward, be honest, don't be a jerk about it. Just say, this is not acceptable to me, to us, to whatever. Explain, either say you're not welcome here anymore, or you're welcome, just don't do it anymore. However you want to handle it. Don't passive aggressively punish them in game. Don't do it. It serves no purpose other than to ruin people's fun. Be okay. As the game master, you have a lot of responsibilities, and this image will become clear in a moment. You have a lot of responsibilities. You have all the NPCs to keep track of. You have the world to keep track of. You have all your locations and cities and adventure ideas and story hooks and plot ideas, and I can go on and on and on. And you have to read books and buy books and host people and bring snacks and make sure there's toilet paper and like anything, right? Usually, if you're the GM, you're responsible for a lot of those things. One of the other things that you and your players should be okay with is you also have to be the taskmaster every now and again. See? Haha, taskmaster. And what I mean by that is when people go off on a crazy conversation about this, that, or the other thing, or they start reading comics at the table or looking at their phone or whatever, they need to know that you are going to, at some point, stop and say, okay, listen, everybody, I, as GM, have too many things going on right now. I need you all to pay attention. I have done this multiple times over the years because we are playing a social game, and I understand we are playing a social game, but we also need to be aware of how much time everybody has. We need to be aware that everybody is there to have a good time themselves, and it's not good to have everybody just go off in a million different directions with 5 different conversations happening at the table, and you're trying as GM to run a combat with 15 different moving pieces to keep track of, and it's just not fair to you. So you need to also set up with your players, or make it clear to your players that, listen, every now and again I might say, okay, hold on, everybody, let's just pause, everybody put your stuff away. I need you to concentrate because I'm getting too distracted and I'm losing track of things and it's going to ruin the game and we're not going to be able to finish at a point that makes sense for the game, or we're going to run late, which we can't do because Eddie needs to go home because he's got his kid to put to bed, whatever you have to do. I have to go work a shift, I have to, who knows, go home because I have a curfew. So make sure your players know it's great to have a good time. You are absolutely all at the table to have a fun time, but you are also there to play a game and get something done, and the GM has to have a good stopping and starting point that they are working towards, or hopefully that you can get to before things have to end. So just be comfortable with being able to tell people, listen, stop, everybody stop. We need to all kind of refocus a little bit here and get back to work. I know I love to make jokes about the minions, and I like to make, quote The Princess Bride and Monty Python and the Dead Alewives and whoever else, right? But this is what we're doing right now. Let's concentrate. I so recommend you doing that, because at some point, if you don't do it, you will blow your top at your players, and that is also not fun and can cause a lot of damage to the group, social damage, obviously, because that's no longer playing the game. That's you getting ticked off and angry at them for just having a good time. So instead of letting yourself get to that point and letting the situation get to that point, just let the players know, hey, stop, everybody, please. I need to be able to concentrate, and there's too many things going on, too much crosstalk, whatever it is. Don't be afraid to do that, because you don't want to yell at your friends, because it's going to ruin the mood and it's going to bring everybody down. It's really an important thing to do. I 100% think that's true. And I got to feature a nice picture of Taskmaster, who I have always loved. While you are running and when you are planning a game, and this is very, very practical, but if you are a new GM or an old GM, I don't know, if you're a very experienced GM, you may have your own ways of doing this, but one of the things I have loved over the years is, instead of writing out pages and pages and pages of text to keep track of what's going to go on in a game or my ideas for things, is I just do single lines, bullet pointed lists of here's an idea, here's an idea, here's an idea, or this leads to this, leads to this, leads to this, or even when I'm in the midst of running a game, I can keep track, or I can have written things down ahead of time to keep track of the specific pieces of information I need to make sure to pass along to the players so that they can get from point A to point B to point C. And maybe they don't need all of those off of that list, but they might need a couple of them, and it's important for me to remember that with everything else going on. I also need to make sure that they need to know that Ned is the guy down at the wharf who owns a boat that they can rent, and that the player characters can rent. And so you have introduced this fact into a story casually, or maybe they specifically are looking to rent a boat to go out on the water, and you then have that information right there. Bullet pointed lists are so much your friend as a GM, because you can keep track of everything very simply. As you relate a piece of information, just cross it off. If you need to update your notes later, you can do that, or put an X on it or something like that, so you have passed that on, and then you may be able to use some of those elsewhere to either inspire new ideas or redirect someone from something they were going to do to go do something else that actually is better or more interesting or just different. Bullet pointed lists, absolutely recommend, especially if you're a new GM. And even if you're running a pre-written adventure, which I'm actually running Ghost of Saltmarsh for another group on Mondays, and even when you read through, this is my cat, read through the adventure, you can make notes of, like what specific things you want to mention in a given room or a cave or whatever it is. And as an example, I was running this salt marsh just the other day, and they had listed a couple of magic items in the description for an encounter as opposed to with the characters that would or should have really had them as equipment. And if I hadn't caught that while reading through the adventure, I would have missed it entirely while I was running the game. So I just made a note. Oh, this guy has a set of mariner's armor. It's not described anywhere else in the book except this one little paragraph on page 64, who knows, whatever it was. And I need to make sure that that's included because it is a cool magic item for one thing, but it would also kind of suck in any game if you're going along and you actually find a magic item that is kind of cool, but because of the way the adventure is put together, you just lose track of it, and so the player characters just lose out on that magic item, which is something they should get. They earned it, right? Like it was earned it, but it was there for them to have, and they should get it. So just keep track of things like that. Any sort of ideas or pieces of information or items or people, locations, you can make bullet pointed lists or however you want to make notes. But any way you can do that and keep things organized, I recommend absolutely. Oh, this was the right image for this. This is one you hear very often. But give your players a chance to shine. Give every single one of them a chance to shine. Whether it's a skill or a power or a background or whatever their class is, or they have a particular storyline that they have going on. Make it so that there is something, if not in every game, maybe every couple of sessions, make sure everybody gets something that is really kind of cool for them. And if you feel like you've been sort of neglecting one player, come up with something to bring them back in and give them something to do. Let the thief sneak around, let the wizard discover something cool, while doing research. Let the character who has a long lost twin find some, piece of information about that character. Just have something in every episode or every couple of episodes that you're playing to keep everybody coming back and engaged. And again, if you, as I said in one of my other videos, if you are making the player characters the heroes of your setting, then you will want to be doing that naturally anyway to keep them involved and keep them excited about the game. I like this image. As a new GM, you're going to want to come up with ideas for games, and for adventures, side adventures, subplots, main plots. You're going to, even if you're running things out of a pre-written adventure, player characters still do things that you need to make up answers for, and they might decide to take a side quest that wasn't in the main adventure, but hey, you know what? This is a big sandboxy world that we can check out anything, anywhere, and go and do anything at any time, then great. And in fact, that's happened in my Salt Marsh game. They decided to try and pick up a side quest to go find some slavers. It's not a written up encounter in the book, but I'll come up with something, and that's fine. But if you are trying to come up with ideas, and there's a movie or a book or a TV show or a magazine or whatever, anything that you like an idea from, feel free to steal it. Everybody does it. Everybody does it all the time. I've actually toyed with the idea of writing up fantasy versions of some really super popular movies and put them out as adventures. So like Die Hard as an adventure for player characters. Kitty, thank you. And I think it would be fun. It could be a lot of fun to have something like that put together. I mean, you could even do it with something like, you pick any movie, Terminator, and could have weird time travel and magic and anything you want to do. Feel free to steal ideas from anywhere. Because guess what? Everybody in high fantasy or any sort of fantasy adventure thing has goals that they want to do, and there are things that are happening in the world, and sometimes those stories can be adapted from other places and brought over, and they're still just as fun. And it's especially good if you happen to be the voracious reader at the table or consumer of anime or, you know, science fiction and fantasy movies or whatever, and everybody else isn't so much, then you can just borrow ideas from other people constantly and they'll never know. And that's fine. Nobody cares. Nobody's going to look down on you. And in fact, in some ways, I think it's super fun to sit down and come up with clever ways to reinterpret stories and tropes that have been used over and over and over and over. Because you get to put your own twist on it and do something different, and it's not only your own twist, it's also your players. They are going to make the story end up different than it actually was in whatever you stole it from. So go ahead, steal whatever settings or storylines, ideas that you want, and just go with it, because nobody cares. That said, we'll go back to this image quickly. In addition to making sure the players all get their own sort of spotlight time every now and again, another good thing to keep in mind when you are planning out adventures is if you want to, well, first off, if you are concentrating on one specific type of adventure, whether it's you're always in the wilderness, or 90% of the time your characters are in the wilderness doing one thing or another. 90% of the time your characters are in an urban setting like Sharn in Eberron or in Waterdeep in the Forgotten Realms. Or 90% of the time your characters are in dungeons. They just literally, they go to a dungeon, have an adventure, come back to the city, sell what they need to, trade what they need to, train. Maybe there's another story thing going on there, but maybe not. Maybe it literally is just like playing the board game Descent from Fantasy Flight, now Asmodee, where you literally go to the dungeon, do all the stuff in the dungeon, fight things, take stuff, take money, take magic items, solve puzzles, go back to the city, sell it, do whatever you need to restock and heal up, and then immediately go back to the dungeon. That's a way to run a game. It's how the game started, was basically that. And it's 100% fine. But if you're running a more, I guess I would say a little more freeform adventure or campaign, vary up those adventure types. So sometimes have a wilderness adventure, sometimes have city adventures, sometimes have what I'll call site-based adventures. And so I have images for all of these. So this was the wilderness adventure because it was just outside. And this was the city adventures, and I think this is from the Tomb of Annihilation, the city down in Chult, I think it was. I don't remember the name of it. But it doesn't look like a very safe city with T-Rexes running around. And site-based adventures, this is the Moat House. I don't know if it's from a computer game or if it's somebody's 3D model of it, but this is from the Temple of Elemental Evil. And when people talk about site-based adventures, they're talking about things like this here. And they're talking about dungeons, they're talking about a castle, they're talking about a cathedral, they're talking about a hidden laboratory, they're talking about, like, any sort of location that you go to and explore is a site-based adventure or a dungeon. That's kind of how they refer to it. But really, in a balanced campaign, I don't know exactly what that means, but like I said, in a more free form, like you're running a game that the characters have some place that they're based out of and they travel to do this, that, or the other thing, they could end up in a city or the wilderness or at a site-based adventure. And often what happens is they leave from a city, travel through the wilderness, maybe they encounter some things there, to a site and have an adventure there. And that all just makes sense, right? So keep that in mind, because it also helps you as GM to spotlight characters. Rangers are typically going to be better suited outside of the city and in the wilderness. They get to kind of show off some of their skills. Rogues are still sneaky no matter where they are, so they do pretty well. Druids or clerics of nature or life might do really well out in the wilderness as well. They also have uses in the other places. Whereas somebody who's, say, a gladiator, so a very powerful fighter, is probably most at home in the city, second at home in a site-based adventure where he just gets to tear through things, and third in the wilderness where he's maybe a little bit lost, or she's maybe a little bit lost because they don't have any skills to help them survive out in the wilderness, and they kind of feel a little vulnerable maybe. And that sort of thing is also fun, right? Like, embrace that aspect of things too when or the characters should be the players should embrace that aspect of things when it comes to their characters, in the whole idea of the yes and, right? Like, oh, I'm a gladiator out in the woods, I don't like this, like, that sounds actually really interesting, and maybe he sticks a little closer to the thief or to the ranger, and normally he's not very nice to them or something. There's all sorts of cool things that can happen with that, and it just varies based on where you're being set. Keep in mind also, you can vary up what it means when I say wilderness, urban, and site-based. So I mentioned a few of the site-based before with things like dungeons, laboratory, castle, but it also could be, a raid on a house, or stealing something from a house. That's still a site-based adventure. But in that case, it would be a site-based adventure in a city, or a site-based adventure maybe out in the wilderness, somebody's house, in a town or something. Uh, Urban settings are not just cities; they are towns, they are villages, they are any other sort of gathering. It could be a nomad collection of huts, something like that. That's still relatively urban, or at least it's as urban as that culture gets. Wilderness is everything. It is not just green grass and forests. It's the mountains, it's swamps, it's out on the water, whether it's on the sea or ocean or on lakes and rivers. Still very different types of encounters in those places. And just keep that in mind. Like, all of these things offer you as the GM and them as the players different things to do and interact with, and it makes it much more interesting. Um, let's see here. These are my maps for this. So this image is here because of what we're talking about next, and this may be a really weird thing or not. And the tip that I'm giving for this is only make up what you need to. And to some people, this is nearly sacrilegious, right? We've got books like this that people write. And this is the Taldori book that just came out recently from Matt Mercer. I can't, sorry, there we go. And Critical Role. And it's thick. This is a very, very thick book. I have never, in 40 years of gaming, written a setting like this because I just don't need to. I don't run games that are always set in the same world, and in fact I like to vary things up from one campaign to the next and have each one have its own personality, and I only make up what needs to be made up, and a lot of that gets made up on the spot. I have created, I can't even tell you how many different worlds, settings, adventures, story ideas that I have no record of whatsoever because they were all created in the moment at the table with my friends and I playing the game. And I only named the city when it needed to be named. I only named characters when they needed to be named. I didn't have if Pumat Sol from, is he in the second campaign? Yes, of Critical Role was in one of my games. I would not have to look up his information when the characters first went to visit his shop. I would just say, you walk into the shop, the owner there is a guy named Pumat Sol. And then I would make up details about Pumat Sol, such as he has a bunch of simulacrum that he's created to work at the place. Like that's all stuff Matt happened to sit down and make all that up ahead of time. You can just make it up at the table if you are not one of the people who wants to sit down and write hundreds and hundreds of pages. And believe me, Matt did not write all of this. There are multiple people listed on here as the writers, even though Matt is the creator. And you get to create your own world however you want. You don't need to write up hundreds of pages of stuff. I keep track of things on like a wiki page, and that's really all I find is needed. And I've had game worlds where none of the character races from the player's handbook were available as options. I've had games that only monstrous races were available. I've had worlds that were post-apocalyptic after a giant magical battle with the gods destroyed the world and everybody was trying to just get by. And I don't have any of that written down other than the notes that I came up with in-game. And that is a 100% valid way to run games because it's all being made up all the time anyway, so why does it matter if you're writing it down ahead of time? I enjoy running games that way, and I certainly spend a lot of time thinking about the game so that I have it in my head, but I don't need to have every single detail written down, and I know I would not look up that information in the moment because it slows things down so much. I want to be able to just go off the top of my head and say, all right, the contact in the Thieves Guild that you guys are talking to is somebody named Ishi. She's a kobold bard who spends a lot of her time on the streets and acts as a go-between for a bunch of message carriers that people just walk up and drop things in her pockets as she's out performing or relaying information. Maybe she's been hired by the city. Who knows? All of that completely off the top of my head. I have not created a character named Ishi who is a kobold bard no, I didn't. I just made that up. And that's how I run games. When I need to, obviously I would come up with things like the city name or the name of the country, that sort of stuff ahead of time. Details that are actually important to the game that I need to keep track of long term. But the stuff, bartender names, the bar's name, that sort of thing, make up what you need to when you need to do it. Unless that makes you incredibly nervous, then find a different way to do that. Make up lists of names, make up lists of people, make up lists of businesses, maybe jot down a few ideas that would be interesting to have for players to interact with the character with a certain personality trait, or with somebody who's grafted a mechanical arm to their back so they can do things behind them when they're still working in front of them. Who knows? Like, it could be anything, right? Like, just come up with interesting and fun things to introduce to your characters, to the player characters, and that is fun. As an example of this, I was mentioning a game a while ago in one of the videos that I'm running where the player characters are kind of a thieves guild. It's actually more like a gang. And I sent them off to find out what was going on in a swamp, and realized when we got to the swamp that I had not named the place, and had to come up with the names for their contacts and all this stuff. And Fortunately, I've been doing this long enough that as soon as one of the players said, "Oh yeah, what's the name of this place?" I was like, Cedar Bridge." So Cedar Bridge became the name of this swamp town, and I like the name because it tells you something about the area. It's wet. They already know it's a swamp, so we know there's water. There's obviously going to be bridges there, or at least one bridge. There are cedar trees growing in the area. That's probably part of their business. Like, all this stuff just flows naturally out of those choices, and that's how I create my game worlds. If you run games like that, great. Then what I'm telling you is you should be perfectly comfortable doing that. That is not a bad way to run. That is an absolutely fine way to run. If you don't run games like that, and that sounds like a thing you'd like to try, then try it. If, another option, you hear me say that and you go, "Oh my God, I could not ever do that. I need to write everything down and have it planned out and make sure, and then I can make things up in the moment, but I need to be way more planned." Great, that's fine. That works for you. Then do that. But I want to make sure that anywhere along that spectrum, you can run games however you want. And if you like to kind of build an entire world and have all the details mapped out from the start and just say, "Okay, this is how things kick off and we're going to go from here," then you're going to spend a lot of time writing up the world you want to create, as opposed to sitting down at the table and just getting going. And that's kind of my approach to it. I think that's actually the last thing I had on my list. Yeah, it is. Yeah, so let's just run through those again quickly. Decide the sort of relationship. I will back up here. Oh, this was supposed to be the image when I was talking about them in the swamp, because they actually went to go fight. They didn't know it, but went to go fight a young black dragon. So decide if you're going to have an adversarial or helpful relationship with your players. Have that conversation early. Don't be passive aggressive in game. Deal with things person to person. Be very upfront. Do them with the group if you need to. Do them one-on-one if you need to. However you need to handle those situations. Don't be passive aggressive. Be a stand-up person who's very straightforward and honest and not a jerk, and it will pay off in the long term for you. Be a taskmaster. Keep everybody on point. And again, don't be a jerk about it, but you know how you feel at the table, and if you feel like you're getting to the point where you're going to get ticked off, instead just go, "Okay, hold on, everybody. Let's refocus here so I don't lose my mind." Highly recommend doing that. Use bullet points. Keep track of things. Do it ahead of time. Do it at the table. Take notes with them. Make sure you're giving out the information you need. Super, super useful. And because they're bullet points, usually it's really easy to just run down the list and find the piece of information that you need. Give everybody a chance to shine. So this is a very common piece of GM advice, and it's very true. You should try and keep this in mind. Steal ideas. As many ideas as you want from anywhere you want. Nobody's going to charge you a royalty. It's not illegal. It's you repurposing everything you've learned in your life and enjoyed in your life and turning it into something for the game. 100% fine. Vary up your locations of adventures, from the wilderness to the city to sites. Vary up the types of each of those. Mix up the different adventures that you're having, depending on the type of game you're having. So if your players are going from dungeon to city to dungeon to city to dungeon to city, then maybe it doesn't matter so much that there's a whole lot of story other than what's going on in the dungeon. But it's nice to have a little bit of variation there, and have different things going on. And it really, most adventures that are published now do have encounters that take place in the city, in the wilderness, in different sites. So something to keep in mind as well. Only make up what you need to. Only reveal what you need to. See the lanterns. You don't need to have everything planned out. You don't need to have this entire book memorized. You just flat out do not. That is a huge stumbling block for some people that, oh, I can't know all that. You don't have to know it all. Make it up ahead of time, make it up in the moment, whatever. You make lists for yourselves to make it as easy as possible. And there you go. That is all the tips for today. And let your third level party of adventurers fight a black dragon. That was fun. That's everything for today. Be back on Thursday for Standby for Adventure and Thaco Thursday. Not sure exactly what we're going to cover this week, but it's pretty fun. Just going to revisit some old first edition, second edition D&D stuff. So have yourself a good night. Stand by for adventure. See you next time.